3. Kathie in New York. It seems now a very long time since that day in September 1983 when I received Kathie's original letter about the events in her backyard and the information about her sister's missing time experience. In the months that followed, the case took on an ever-expanding, nearly epic quality, and now directly involves over 20 people, 4 of whom, under hypnosis, have recalled UFO abduction encounters. Another 2 hypnotic subjects have remembered what I take to be pieces of an abduction scenario, but remain, for one reason or another, partially blocked in their recall. 7 have described with considerable detail low-level sightings of apparent UFOs in the area, and there is evidence ranging from very strong to merely circumstantial that 7 others may have also be harboring forgotten UFO abductions. This bizarre saga is so complex that only parts of it can be retold in these pages. So in an attempt to be inclusive, I have appended at the end of the book short accounts in outline form of most of these other incidents. The story cannot be told in a strictly linear chronological way. The order in which I learned of particular incidents is not necessarily the order in which they were investigated. Some of these accounts are marginal, and some are intimately connected with Kathie Davis's own experiences. 9 people have undergone regressive hypnosis, and I have conducted personal interviews with another 19. But despite the complexity of the case and the number of people involved, Kathie Davis is beyond any doubt the central figure in this complex story. So far, I have not described in any detail the way we actually met, an event which occurred in mid-October when Kathie made her first visit to New York. I have referred to the many phone calls we exchanged before that visit and the new information that various members of the Davis family provided me with almost daily. When Kathie and I finally agreed on a mutually convenient date for her trip, I began to prepare in earnest. I scheduled a program of interrogation and hypnotic regression sessions to explore that new information as thoroughly as possible, and I set up a semi-social evening so that I could introduce Kathie to some other investigators in our area. But above all, I was looking forward with great curiosity to actually meeting her. Like almost everyone else I have encountered in her situation, people who are beginning to suspect they have undergone consciously unremembered UFO experiences, Kathie was becoming very disturbed about what our investigation might disclose. By telephone, I tried to ease her anxiety, a condition she assured me she had lived with most of her life. In addition to chronic anxiety, Kathie suffers from the kind of insomnia which is synonymous with night fear of the dark, of the particular loneliness and isolation an insomniac feels in a house of sleepers. She told me that she always sleeps better during daylight hours and that often at night she keeps a light and her telephone set on to ease her nervousness and help her feel less vulnerable. Over the years, I have observed this sort of free-floating, apparently unreasonable dread in many people who have undergone consciously unremembered yet traumatic UFO abduction experiences. It has led me to shift the emphasis in my investigations from simple information gathering to a currently much larger place for therapeutic considerations, helping the abductee deal with fear and uncertainty and an inevitable sense of isolation from those who have not had to suffer through this truly unearthly experience. As with rape victims, and on some level UFO abduction is a species of rape. Membership in a support group of fellow victims can be very helpful. I frequently employ a kind of buddy system in such situations, a technique which has given real aid and comfort to people who are beginning to explore, through hypnosis and other means, their buried traumatic encounters. Thus, an abductee who has already been through such an extensive, in-depth investigation can be contacted when needed by an individual beginning his or her personal search. But there's one crucial ground rule. The abductee whose case has already been investigated is not permitted to give any information as to the content of his or her abduction experience. Descriptions of the UFO, its occupants, technical procedures, sequence of events, etc. The only permissible area of discussion is, however, vast and emotional, how one deals with the knowledge that such literally unbelievable events may have actually happened, how one tries to integrate this kind of unthinkable experience into one's life, how one deals with the fear and uncertainty that this knowledge engenders. I gave Kathie the New York phone number of Sue, a woman close to Kathie in age who is intelligent and deeply sensitive to the psychological wounds inevitably suffered by anyone who has undergone this kind of experience. In keeping with the pattern, I have come to think of as almost invariable. Sue was first abducted as a small child, in her case at the age of 5. She had a series of experiences after that time culminating in a particularly traumatic abduction that occurred when she was 16 in a suburban area about 30 miles from New York City. She and a friend, a 16-year-old boy who lived in her neighborhood, saw a large orange light descend on a nearby hill. They went to see what it was, and 2 hours later, inexplicably found themselves a quarter of a mile away from the hilltop, feeling odd and having no recollection of what had happened in the intervening time. Sue complained afterwards of a pain at her navel and the feeling that her face had somehow been sunburned. But the psychological after effects were more disturbing. Sue comes from a comfortable upper middle class Jewish background, and her behavior until this time had been exemplary. A deep unease soon began to manifest itself, and within a year or so after this experience, she had begun to use drugs as a way to keep her apparently rootless anxiety at bay. Knowing Sue as she is now, an efficient and well-paid businesswoman involved in a stable and loving relationship with an interesting man, it is difficult to imagine her as the fear-ridden heroin user that she became during the many months she'd spent in college. Emotional support from her family, years of psychotherapy, and her own strong will each undoubtedly played a role in her gradual emergence from these problems. Eventually, she felt strong enough and determined enough to explore what may have been a central cause of her anxiety, the traumatic UFO experiences that lay just below the surface of her conscious recollections. Sue was an ideal and generous confidant for Kathie. After an initial very long phone conversation from her office, Sue provided Kathie with her unlisted phone number in case Kathie felt she had to talk at any hour of the day or night. Separately, both Sue and I assured Kathie that apparently nothing had ever happened to anyone once an investigation had begun into his or her UFO encounters. We insisted that from now on she would be left alone by them. by whoever had been carrying out these disturbing abductions in the past. The beginning of serious investigation. I told Kathie would mark the end of her UFO experiences. I was very, very wrong. Kathie made arrangements to leave Indianapolis by bus on Thursday, October 13th, and she would arrive in New York the next day. Everything seemed fine. However, about 2 a.m. on the morning of October 3rd, Sue was awakened by a long-distance phone call from a very frightened Kathie. Kathie had been lying in bed, reading and idly watching television when she heard her name called. Firmly and precisely. It was somehow in her head rather than aloud, but it seemed as if two voices were speaking in unison. Kathie! She felt a cold, paralyzing fear, and after a moment jumped up and fled from her room. She ran downstairs and immediately called Sue in New York, saying that she knew something terrifying was about to happen to her. Sue sleepily tried to calm her. She suggested that she take a tranquilizer or a drink and to turn up the phonograph and the TV and go back to bed. Sue's advice did not help much, Kathie admitted later. They chatted a while, and after ending their conversation, Kathie slipped back into her state of dread. She took a tranquilizer, but cursed the fact that it would take many minutes to have an effect. She was too terrified to go back to bed, so instead, she went to her parents' room and wakened her mother. Her father was a sound and determined sleeper, telling her only that her heart was pounding and that she felt ill. "Take some aspirin," her mother answered drowsily, "and try to sleep." But as Kathie turned to leave, a small ball of light whizzed down the hall past her. "What was that?" she asked, and her mother answered, "It must be lightning." But the ball of light had clearly been in the hall, only a few feet from Kathie. Outside, there was absolutely no sign of a storm. At this point, Kathie was more frightened than ever and more determined not to return to her room alone. She went into her son's room, picked up little Tommy, her 3-year-old, and carried him into bed with her. Now that she had some company, she was not so afraid. So she turned up her television set and began to read. Surprisingly, she found herself becoming drowsy, and she soon fell asleep. At some later time, she was awakened by her mother, who was standing in her doorway. "What do you want?" her mother asked. "Why did you call?" Kathie said that she had been sleeping and had not said anything, but Mary insisted that she heard someone calling her that she thought was Kathie. At this moment, the two women noticed a low humming sound coming from somewhere outside the house. Kathie was too frightened now, even to look out the window. Mary said that maybe there was a truck parked in front with its engine idling, so she went downstairs to investigate. She glanced out the front windows and saw nothing on the road near their house. But as she told me later, she was too frightened herself to go outside and actually look around and up where the sound actually seemed to be located. She went back upstairs, and eventually mother and daughter went back to sleep. In the morning, when she awoke, Kathie felt an extreme stiffness in her neck, and her arms and shoulders felt exhausted. As if, she explained, she'd spent the night lifting weights. When her mother came down to breakfast, she also described having a stiff neck and a dull pain in her arms and shoulders. Their complaints were identical. Kathie called me that morning and told me about the events of the night before. I asked if she could see any unusual marks on herself or her mother, but she said she hadn't noticed anything. I inquired about the state of her bedclothes and nightgown. She left the phone to look and then came back to report that there were a few tiny bloodstains on her sheet, clustered at the top in a place where her neck would have rested. Later, she found a few more small drops of dried blood on the bottom sheet, over to one side, but near the region of her lower back. I have since seen these stains. They are small, discrete drops, perhaps 1/8 of an inch in diameter. None is smeared or blotted. They are quite precise, as if Kathie had been very still when they marked the bedclothes. This new development was deeply upsetting to me. I had truly believed that once our investigation started, Kathie's UFO encounters would cease. Though this had apparently been the case in previous investigations, I was aware that my belief rested as much on hope as experience. I wanted it to be over. Kathie had suffered enough. Yet something disturbing had obviously happened to her on October 3rd, something only partially remembered but clearly possessing a physical dimension. Her mother had very likely had the same experience. Sue's attempt to help via the telephone and my earlier assurances had made no difference whatsoever. The UFO phenomenon simply does what it wants, when it wants to. On Friday, October 14th, I took the subway to the Port Authority bus terminal to meet Kathie's bus. Her inevitably uncomfortable overnight trip from Indianapolis took about 17 hours. She had left her children with her mother and was coming to New York for the very first time in her life, at her own expense, to stay in the studio of a stranger, myself, and explore some of the most inherently disturbing experiences one can ever know. She had told me that I would easily recognize her. She was overweight, traveling alone, and would be wearing a certain color coat. The bus pulled in, and there she was, smiling a shy, sleepy little smile, and obviously wondering if she or I, or both, were hopelessly crazy to be doing what we were doing. Kathie was tired, thirsty, hungry, and in need of a cigarette and a ladies' room. After we took care of several of these requirements, we headed back to my Chelsea studio via her first New York subway train. Kathie was surprised to come through the experience unscathed. Knowing what she had heard about New York subways, she naturally expected we would be mugged or at least shot at. Curious as to the source of her information, I asked if she had ever been to New York before. With a twinkle in her eye, she answered no, she hadn't, but she'd seen a lot of Charles Bronson movies. I liked her immediately. One of the things I discussed with Kathie on our first afternoon together was her medical history. Broaching that subject was tantamount to opening Pandora's box. Since her birth in 1959, poor Kathie had suffered just about every medical anomaly I had ever heard of. Her overweight condition seems to be the result of hormonal imbalance. She began menstruating regularly at the age of 7, the beginning of her pubescence. By the age of 10, she had grown to her present weight, 5 foot 3.5 inches. and was under treatment for high blood pressure. At the age of 14, she was operated on for gallstones, and her gallbladder was removed. She has suffered from hepatitis and almost died during a severe bout with pneumonia, which presented all the symptoms of what is now known as Legionnaire's disease. She has had her appendix removed and once spent 2 weeks in traction because the 2 extra vertebrae in her spine somehow fused. Very early in 1983, she was hospitalized with what seemed to be an asthmatic attack. A lung collapsed, and she was treated with an intravenous bronchial dilator. She suffered an apparent allergic reaction to the medication and spent the following 2 weeks in the hospital. After the traumatic events of the summer of 1983, Kathie began to exhibit symptoms of heart arrhythmia, and on one occasion, the irregular heartbeat was so disturbing that paramedics had to be summoned. The tale of Kathie's health problems is long and depressing, which makes her courage and physical resilience all the more remarkable. In 1983, doctors were certain she had contracted Cushing's disease since she exhibited all its symptoms, but the test results, luckily, were negative. Hypoglycemia, hypoadrenalism, and high blood pressure have all been chronic problems, and allergic reactions to certain medications have compounded her difficulties. Kathie has not been spared her share of what used to be called female problems. When she had her appendectomy, the surgeon also removed some cysts on her ovaries, and though a hysterectomy was contemplated, it was finally not performed. The birth of Kathie's younger son, Tommy, was smooth and uneventful, but her first son, Robbie, very nearly did not survive. He was born 2 months prematurely by cesarean section after Kathie suffered sudden kidney failure. Robbie's heart stopped twice during the delivery, but he survived in an intensive care unit and now, years later, is flourishing. Certain of these medical details may be significant in the light of the UFO experiences Kathie and her family have undergone, and I offer them here merely as raw material for speculation. As a young teenager, Kathie noticed a small bump on the front of her shin bone, as if there were a round, movable object just below the skin. There was no pain connected with it, only a kind of low-level discomfort. With her fingers, Kathie could move this object around, perhaps a half-inch or so from a slight subcutaneous indentation where it normally rested. During one of her medical visits, she pointed it out to her doctor, and he decided to dissolve the cyst by injecting it with the medication. The object, however, turned out to be impenetrable, and the needle broke off. Later, when Kathie went to the hospital for her gallbladder operation, her doctor announced that he would remove it surgically while she was under the anesthetic. When she had regained consciousness and left the recovery room, he came into the ward and showed her a small, calcified object. It was quite remarkable, he told her. When he first pressed lightly down with his scalpel, the skin opened and the cyst shot straight up several feet into the air, hitting the metal reflector of the surgical lamp with a ping. As it dropped back, he caught it in his hand. It had startled everyone in the operating room. "You have a smart body," the doctor told her. A small, fatty pad had formed between her shin bone and this floating, eventually flying cyst, protecting the bone in a kind of natural insulation process. Kathie never really inquired, and thus does not know what lay at the heart of this calcified mass. It is ironic that what would be one of the easiest, most natural things for a UFO investigator to do is often one of the most difficult. Listening carefully to the witness and taking particular note of what the witness feels is especially significant. We tend to let our knowledge of other cases and patterns dictate what we select out as being particularly significant in the subject's account. This, I'm sorry to say, is what happened during my first interview with Kathie. In the context of her medical history, almost the first thing she told me was an event that had always bothered her and that made no sense either to her or to her doctor. Of all the difficulties she'd endured, this was the most emotionally painful, possessing normal, healthy appetites. Kathie had been sexually active, though her knowledge of contraception was almost nil. In fact, she had been very lucky and had never had an accidental pregnancy. In late 1977, she met and soon fell in love with her husband-to-be. They made plans to be married in the spring of 1978. Early in 1978, however, Kathie realized that she was pregnant. Positive blood and urinalysis tests confirmed the fact. Kathie was elated, as was her fiancé, and the date for the wedding was moved up a few months. Things were proceeding happily, and her body was beginning to undergo subtle changes, until one day in March when Kathie awoke with what seemed to be a normal menstrual flow. Her mother assured her that such things sometimes happen and that she shouldn't be too alarmed. But a visit to her doctor confirmed her fears. She was no longer pregnant, yet there had been no apparent miscarriage, no physical traces that would attest to a natural abortion. She just wasn't pregnant anymore. Her doctor was perplexed, but for Kathie, the experience was truly shattering. Kathie was married in April, according to the plan she and her fiancé had established. She went on to have two sons, Robbie, born in July of 1979, and Tommy, born in September of 1980. But the loss of her first baby has always been a particularly tragic memory for her. She made all of this very clear to me on that October afternoon when we talked for the first time in my studio. Yet at that time, I just assumed it was a sad personal event, totally unrelated to Kathie's ongoing UFO experiences. Again, I was very, very wrong. Kathie's very first hypnotic session occurred later that same October day in the office of Dr. Aphrodite Clemar, with Martin Jackson, an associate of mine, as an additional observer. There were two major areas I was eager to explore: Kathie's 1978 dream about the figures in her bedroom, and the more recent events which triggered her late-night phone call to Sue. We decided to begin with the earlier dream experience. Kathie was quite nervous about undergoing hypnosis, so Dr. Clemar used extra care in inducing the trance and making sure that she was comfortable. Kathie said very little. She saw the two small, gray-faced figures standing by her bed, just as they had in her dream. Her fear was acute, and she asked to be put into a deeper trance. But by the end of this first session, very few additional images had come to mind. It was clear to all of us that we would have to make a second attempt to explore this experience on another day when Kathie would be less tired and anxious. There had been one interesting physical development, however. More than once during the hypnosis, Kathie complained that her throat felt odd and uncomfortable, as if it contained traces of a dripping liquid. She frequently swallowed and cleared her throat. During the next session, the reason for her discomfort became vividly clear. As we drove home, Kathie made a statement that exemplified her basic openness and honesty. "I want to find out about what happened," she said. "I know this is going to be scary. It was scary the first time when I was dreaming it. It might not be anything. It might just be dreams. I don't know. If it is, it would be nice to know it's just dreams. If it's not, at least I'll know what I'll have to learn to live with." Our second session took place on Sunday afternoon. Again, Dr. Clamar gave a long, careful induction. And again, we went back to Kathie's 1978 dream about the two small figures in her attic bedroom, but this time the sequence of events broadened dramatically. Kathie recalled awakening next to her sleeping husband and for some reason getting out of the bed. She did not describe seeing the small figures at this time, so I guessed that the moment she was re-experiencing occurred either before or after that confrontation. She described going into the kitchen of their small apartment and standing by the sink as if waiting for something. After a long pause, she felt herself floating comfortably with her eyes closed, seeing nothing. She seemed to be lying down, and then she said she was being touched and examined. Next, she twisted about in obvious discomfort as she described two thin probes pressing up into her nostrils. It hurt when they seemed to break through the region of her sinuses. She cleared her throat, swallowing uneasily as she felt something drip at the back of her throat. It tasted bitter and metallic, she told us later, like blood. Various other physical recollections followed. Pressure at her abdomen and at her neck, for example. Finally, she opened her eyes and saw the small gray-skinned figure standing next to the table on which she lay. The man's huge black eyes gazed down at her. She felt frightened and then oddly and almost simultaneously reassured. There was no communication other than the sense she had that she would not be harmed. Apart from difficulty swallowing and clearing her throat, Kathie appeared to be calm for several minutes. Then she was startled once more as she re-experienced her dream of awakening in bed with the two figures standing nearby, holding the shimmering box. It was clear to me now that the morning after this experience, Kathie remembered only the end of her abduction experience rather than its beginning or middle. The gray figure handed her the box, telling her to look at it, and then took it away with the observation delivered telepathically that when she saw it again, she would understand its purpose. Shortly thereafter, she went back to sleep, and having reached that convenient halting place, Dr. Clamar brought her out of the trance. We had more reason than ever before to proceed with the exploration of Kathie's and her mother's recent experience. This description of thin needles being pressed high up into the nasal cavity is a very familiar one in UFO abduction accounts, and occasionally the abductee has been able to see a very small BB-like ball at the end of the probe. In several reports, this tiny 2 to 3 millimeter in diameter object is no longer present after the probe is withdrawn, and there are some descriptions of a probe being inserted without anything on its tip. But when it is withdrawn, there's a tiny ball attached. One is naturally led to infer that implants of some sort are being put in place and sometimes removed. an incident that occurred in Truman, Kentucky in the middle 1940s, provides a vivid illustration of this sort of operation. Under hypnosis, the subject relived her experience as a 5-year-old child. She had been taken by several little men into a large, cold, brightly lit craft and placed on a table. She could not move, and after several intermittently painful physical operations of some kind, she became frightened anew. He's taken something and putting it in my nose, and I don't want him to. No, it hurts. No, don't. Don't, it hurts. No, I can't. No. What does this thing look like? It's long. It's a long little thing, and he's putting it in my nose, and it hurts. And I don't want it in there. No, don't let him do that. No, please. No, it hurts. What part of your nose does it hurt? It hurts in my head. Up in my head, way up in my nose, far in my nose. And I don't want him to do it, 'cause it hurts. In a September 1981 abduction case involving Megan Elliott and her infant daughter, Renee, Megan described this sort of nasal probe being inserted in Renee's nose. This Wood County, Texas incident was thoroughly investigated by Lou Willis, and his report includes this passage. Can you see anything on the end of the probe? Yes, just a little ball. Just how big would you say it is? Oh, small. Small like a baseball or a BB, or smaller than a BB. Smaller than a BB. One final question there. When the probe was extracted, was the BB still there on the end of the probe? I didn't see it come out. In Missing Time, I dealt with 3 separate instances of apparent nasal cavity implants, and in my investigations since that time, I've encountered several more. Yet, so far as I know, no one has unequivocally established that an implant is currently in place in any abductee. X-rays, of course, require that an object be radiopaque in order to be seen, and a 2mm object is very close to the resolution limit of most CAT scans. I'm certain, however, that eventually one of these objects will be located, and then we will have our long sought after physical artifact, our smoking gun. Speculation about the purpose of these possible implants runs to any or all of 3 unappetizing possibilities. They could function as locators, in the mode of the small radio transmitters zoologists attach to the ears of hapless, tranquilized elk to trace their wanderings. Or they could be monitors of some sort, relaying the thoughts, emotions, or even visual and sensory impressions of the host. Or, and perhaps least palatable, they could have a controlling function as receivers, suggesting the possibility that abductees could from time to time be made to act as surrogates for their abductors. I do not wish to dwell on any of these paranoia-inducing theories. Perhaps these BB-like objects have some other as yet unimagined purpose or purposes. Whenever we consider these large theoretical questions about the ultimate nature, source, and intention of the UFO phenomenon, we must admit that we still have no final answers. One other odd detail that Kathie recalled is her sense that the 2 gray figures moved in absolute unison. When one leaned forward, the other one did too, in exactly the same way. They moved together as if they were one. This observation comports with Kathie's having heard her name called in the October incident as if by two voices speaking in unison. David Oldham, describing the small figures he faced during an abduction experience in 1966, was startled when all of them blinked their eyes at the same instant, in perfect unison. In a case I recently investigated, a Minnesota man driving on a lonely road near the Plate River was stopped by 5 tall figures who stood near a large hovering light. When they began to move towards him, he noticed that they all stepped off simultaneously on the left foot. His first thought was that they must be soldiers on maneuvers, though almost immediately he had reason to drop that idea. I do not know what this clone-like appearance and behavior means, but it is not a constant in abduction reports. More often, a witness will recall differences in both the appearance and behavior of various UFO occupants within the same craft. Again, we just do not know how to interpret these seemingly contradictory patterns. The next item on our investigative agenda was the night in early October when Kathie called Sue at 2 a.m. to tell her of having heard her name called and knowing that something terrible was about to happen. In discussing her recollections, she mentioned a segment of that evening's events that she had not previously discussed with me. Just before she went to bed and heard the simultaneously voiced Kathie, she had taken a drive to a nearby all-night food store to get something to drink. Kathie consumes large quantities of Diet Pepsi. The first odd detail she remembered was the fact that she had just returned from this food store, a 10-minute drive from her home, with a few items when she realized she was thirsty and had not bought anything to drink. It was during this second trip that she saw a large, brightly lit object in the sky that she assumed was the Goodyear blimp. Something about this second trip to the store remained in her memory as both peculiar and elusive. She came home and went to bed, and then the voice called. There was the humming outside, her fear, and her phone call to Sue. Unfortunately, Dr. Clamar was unavailable for any more hypnotic sessions that week. Dr. Robert Naiman, a psychiatrist who had also done hypnosis for me in UFO abduction cases, had no time to give us, and I was unable to locate another hypnotist with appointments available in the time remaining before Kathie was scheduled to return to Indianapolis. Therefore, I decided, with Kathie's immediate approval, to do the hypnosis myself. I set the scene in the usual manner. We began at the point when Kathie returned from her first trip to the store to buy some groceries. I walk into the house and I'm really freezing. Daddy's sitting at the table. I'm dragging the stuff and I'm asking him if he wants any of my munchies. He said no. I went up to my room and put my book and my magazine down and my stuff, and I washed up. I started feeling colder. I'm feeling kind of tingly all over. The skin on my arm feels prickly. And the clock says it's 11:45. And I forgot to get something to drink because I'm real thirsty. Yeah, I go in the kitchen and see if we have any Pepsi. We don't, so I told my dad I was going to get something to drink. I'm feeling prickly or colder than before, and I'm so thirsty. and I get in my car, and the inside light didn't come on. But then it came on. A second later, the key buzzer buzzed. And this is kind of weird, you know? And I'm thinking it's kind of creeping me out. I feel kind of funny, kind of creepy, but... And I keep trying to start it, and then I check my lights, and they come on when I start it. With the lights on, it starts. So I'm hoping I don't get stuck somewhere in the stupid car, and I pull out the driveway, driving down the street. I see something in the sky. I'm right at... and I catch a glimpse of this out of the corner of my eye. And I'm thinking, well, that's weird. And I go to the traffic light, and there's no cars, so I go past the light, and I'm in front of the parking lot and I look up at it again, and it's still there. I didn't stop. I slowed down. Now I still see it. It isn't moving much, and I'm looking between two big trees. I'm thinking that it must be the Goodyear blimp because Wilma saw the Goodyear blimp this morning, real low. I'll bet that's what it is because it looks just like it. It has its message lights on the bottom, pretty big too. I stopped the car and looked at it for a minute, and well, I never saw the Goodyear blimp roll like that when it turned. It's awfully low. I'm going to watch this thing because it's not going anywhere. It's just going in circles or rolling or something. And when it kind of rolls, it's rolling over instead of turning. It rolls to the... I don't know. It's really strange. I'll just keep going. I got to the store. I went to the 7-Eleven. And now I can't... I can't see that now. God damn it! Everything is all right, Kathie. Just tell us what you're seeing. Well, hell, I thought I was at the store, but I see the windows and the lights in the windows at the store, but that guy was not the clerk, I swear. I thought I was at the store, but then I saw him looking at me. I know him. I'm not scared of him, but I was shocked to see him. I wasn't expecting to see him, and he's smiling at me. I mean, he wasn't going to hurt me. I got a twitch in my thumb. Man, he just popped in. There he was. He shocked me. Don't do that to me, sneaking up behind me and scaring me like that. Want me to have a heart attack? And my thumb won't quit twitching. I feel quite cold. There are many details in Kathie's account so far that exactly parallel UFO abduction cases I've investigated in the past. For some reason, many abductees describe being physically cold during their experiences. Dr. Clemar employs a hypnosis frequently in her regular non-UFO therapeutic practice, but rarely does anyone report being chilly while in the trance state in her office. Yet so often did this situation occur when the subjects were UFO abductees that she began to keep a blanket handy for use on just such occasions. Two possible explanations for this common reaction suggest themselves. Fear, existing at the threshold of traumatic shock, can cause the subject to feel unusually cold. But there's also some testimony to the fact that the interiors of the UFOs themselves may actually be cold. Hypnosis, as we know, can provide the vividly reenacted illusion of real experience. At the heart of Kathie's account is the suggestion that her behavior is somehow being externally controlled. She has just visited the store, and yet suddenly she feels the need to return. She describes going upstairs to her room and preparing to settle down to read. But then she starts to feel cold and tingly all over, and after these odd symptoms, she realizes she is thirsty and must go back to the store. Her thirst provides a convenient reason for another trip, though obviously there were other things in the house for her to drink. Odd electrical problems develop as she tries to start her car, all of which seem to deepen her sense of dread. But still, nothing deters her from her mission. And then she notices and begins to carefully observe a strange lighted object in the sky. As the object rolls and maneuvers about, its behavior perhaps literally mesmerizing, she finds herself at what she assumes is the store. It has big windows and lights, but the clerk who approaches her, one can assume, has never used a cash register. Her account continues. "Are you in your car, Kathie?" "No, not now. I don't know how I got from my car to where I'm standing. I can't stay long. I have to go home." "Now you've talked to him. Does he say anything back to you?" "Yeah. He asked me how I was feeling. I can't remember what he asked. He asked me something else. He told me something I can't remember. I don't want to remember." "Calm down, Kathie. Can you give us any idea of where you are when this is happening?" "I don't know. I'm standing in front of the store, but it's not the store. I mean, it's big. The big windows, long windows, and all that light coming from the windows and things in the windows. But he was in there and he came out. I don't remember seeing how he came out. I saw him in there, and then I saw him out there, and I was standing with him. I stopped the car to look at that thing in the sky, and then I'm at the store, and there's that guy. I don't know." At this point in her narrative, her recollection of the encounter with this small figure and the presumably landed UFO ends, and amnesia sets in. What follows more or less agrees with her later conscious memories of the trip to the store. I went out and bought stuff, so I'm going home now. I go home. I looked in the sky all the way home. I even went the other way." Kathie describes the route she takes home as being peculiar, as if she had been a little out of her way from the round trip she would normally have made. When she comes into the house, she remarks that her father has gone up to bed. "Do you notice what time it is?" It can't be that. It don't take no. I left at 11:45, and I saw my clock, and it says it's 20 till 1, and the 7-Eleven is maybe 10 minutes away, and I feel a bit creepy again." "Did you get a drink? Are you thirsty?" "I think I never got a drink, and I'm not thirsty." "Looked at TV for a while?" I called Sue." At this point, I calmed Kathie, and shortly thereafter, I brought her out of the trance. We decided that the second part of the October experience would be held over for another hypnotic session. Apparently, this first part of the encounter was only a prelude for what would happen later. Kathie is lured out of her house so that she can be approached and told something that frightens her and that she doesn't want to remember. Something perhaps about what would take place later in the house when everyone was asleep. This two-step abduction is, so far as I know, unique in the UFO literature. It illustrates an unsettling situation that, unfortunately, I believe to be fairly common. Many UFO abductees seem to be on shorter leashes than any of us had ever previously suspected. They seem to be all too readily available whenever and for whatever reasons they are needed. Kathie's round trip to the store that night should have taken between 20 and 25 minutes, allowing her to slightly return home quickly. But according to her recollections, it took nearly an hour. There is a missing time period of roughly 30 minutes, yet Kathie's recollections of her encounter with the diminutive, gray-faced figure do not account for that much elapsed time. Clearly, more happened during this incident than she recalled. A few days later, she did remember one more exchange. Moments after the figure first appeared and startled her, she calmed down enough to think to herself, "It's crazy here. I'm about to go to New York and explore this stuff, and now this happens." The small man answered her thought, as it were in a very easy way. Kathie's sense of his reply was something like, "That's nice that you're going to New York. It's nice you'll see your friends. It's very nice." As if nothing made any difference at all. The trip, the upcoming hypnosis, the investigation, and so forth. There was no sense of a threat, a prohibition, a warning, only the most casual sense of recognition. It was almost, in Kathie's view, the way one speaks to a child. "That's nice. That's a very pretty doll. You're lucky to have a nice doll like that." I didn't say it to Kathie, but this exchange lent me a little peace of mind, something that lately seemed in very short supply. Our next hypnotic session picked up at the point when Kathie returned from the store without having brought any Diet Pepsi after all. She described watching TV in her bedroom. "Are you enjoying it?" "It's all right. I'm not really watching it. I'm just listening to it. My eyes are shut, and I'm really tired. Oh no. This is starting to hurt. It's kind of throbbing a little bit. That pain will melt away, slowly. I can still feel it, but it doesn't hurt anymore. Something inside of my head feels like it's throbbing. High up under my nose. Oh well, it's probably just my sinuses. If it gets worse, I'll just take an aspirin. I can hear something like a power line. It's got a real high-pitched humming sound. But I don't really hear it. It's like it's in my head, you know? Oh, my arm feels funny." "What's the matter, Kathie?" "I don't know. I feel kind of creepy about the window. I keep looking up at the curtain. It's right by my bed. A row of windows. I don't know why I keep looking up there. I got a creepy feeling. It's probably just my imagination." "Are you still watching the television?" Uh-uh. I'm listening to it. And tomorrow I'm going to Jimmy's and I'm just thinking about it. I hope he's, going to be in a good mood." "What was that?" "What's happening, Kathie? Did you hear a noise?" "You're safe here, Kathie. It's over with. You're just remembering something that happened a while ago. You're completely safe. Tell me what you see. I just heard my name. Oh boy, it really scared me. I wasn't expecting that. What did it sound like, Kathie? Two voices talking at the same time. They just said,
Kathie!
and it was really loud. It wasn't me. Maybe it was Mom. No, it wasn't her. I keep looking out the window. There's nothing there. I'm really getting scared now. I don't know why I keep thinking something's going to happen. What's happening now, Kathie? I got a real bad headache. I'm going to go downstairs and call Sue, 'cause I'm scared. I don't want to go downstairs, but I have to call Sue. I don't want to walk by the kitchen window again, and I don't want to walk by the living room window either. So I'll just go downstairs and call Sue, and then I won't be so scared. My mom will probably kill me for calling long distance, but I'll pay for it myself. I have to call her. I feel like something's really going to happen. Do you go down and call her? Yes. I'm sitting on a chair next to the microwave oven. I'm calling her and I'm really crying and I keep hearing that noise. And I thought I saw a light outside in front of the room through the curtain. I looked and saw the chandelier lights reflecting from the window. But there was another light beside the chandelier light, and I looked again, and it was gone. I don't want to go by the window again. Any window. I don't even want to look at them. Now, Kathie, let's jump ahead just a little bit. You talked to Sue and told her what you were seeing, and you thanked her, and then you hung up. Now you feel better. What are you going to do now? What happens now? I don't feel that much better. I'm still scared. And I still think something's going to happen. Even though Sue told me it wouldn't. I still think something's going to happen. So I take a tranquilizer. I know it's going to be an hour before this sucker starts to work. What am I going to do till then? I go back up to my room. The lights are still on. I never turn them off. And I turn the TV up. I turn on my radio, and I get a magazine, and I still feel funny, like something's going to happen, and my heart is flipping a little bit. And that just made me more scared. I couldn't stand to be near my bedroom window. So I get up and go in my mom's room. I knock on her door and she says, "What do you want?" I go over to the foot of her bed and say, "My heart's flipping." And she says, "Take your heart medicine and some Pepto-Bismol and go to bed. You'll be okay." I'm still thinking something's going to happen. So I go out in the hallway and I'm just standing there for a few minutes, deciding what I'm going to do. I don't want to go back to my room, and I don't want to go to the bathroom, and I don't want to go downstairs. I just want to hide. I believe I turned around, and I was going to go to my room. Then I changed my mind and decided to go into Robbie and Tommy's room. And just when I was turning to go into their room, I saw a flash of light in the hallway. And it was like a little ball. And it streaked and flashed at the same time. It left like a tracer almost. It made me jump. And I stepped back into Mom's door. And I said, "Mom, did you see that lightning?" And she said, "Yeah. But how could it be lightning in my hallway?" Something's funny. It isn't right. Something's going to happen. I know it. Something bad is going to happen. So I go into the kid's room and get Tommy. He's sound asleep. So I pick him up and carry him back to my bedroom with me. And I feel guilty about waking him up. But I just can't be in that room again by myself. I'm just so scared. So I lay Tommy down next to me, and he wakes up for a minute. But he's back sound asleep right away, and I wish I could be. I cover him up with my cover. I lay down and read some more Rolling Stone, and this sound's going on, and this kid's not waking up. I got the TV on, and I got lights on, and I got the stereo on, and I'm reading, and this kid just went right back to sleep. Oh, I'm going to go to sleep now. My arms tingle. I'm going to sleep. My body tingles. My whole body tingles. It feels good. I'm just going to go to sleep. My head feels like it's floating. It feels real light. My whole body tingles, especially my upper arms, and my knees tingle real cold. It feels good. I feel real good. I just feel like I'm floating. My hands feel like they're on backwards, and my thumbs are pointing the other way. Feels kind of weird, but it feels good. Just kind of feels fine. I'm gonna go to sleep. I hear this funny noise. It sounds like somebody's breathing real fast and short. Kind of puff, puff, only real faint. Only it's not me. I feel some poking, thumping on my chest, under my left breast. It's kind of like somebody thumped you. I'm asleep. But I can think. I think I'm asleep. I feel fine. It's real tingly. Did you just poke me under the arm? No, Kathie, I didn't. Which arm was it? My right arm. Do you know what poked you? I don't know. I can't see. I can't open my eyes. Maybe that's Tommy I hear breathing, but can you hear the stereo? No. The television? No. It's quiet. Now somebody poked me under my left breast. This time my right breast and my ribs by my heart. I can smell burning matches again. It smells like burning matches. And it stinks. Can you open your eyes? I can't. I can't open my eyes. Did they poke you through your nightgown? I don't think I have any clothes on. I don't know. I don't feel any. I feel cold. They're doing something with my chest. Who's the they? I don't know. I can't see. Whoever's touching me, I feel touching. I feel cold touches on both sides of my chest, underneath my breasts, and alongside of them, and fingers or something cold touching me. What do they feel like? Do they feel like fingers? Yeah, sort of, but they're cold. Are they soft? Not real soft. Do you still hear that noise? Just really, really faint. Kind of, I don't even know if it's a noise, just a vibration of something. It's just low key or whatever. What's happening now, Kathie? Just feel like my nose is running down my throat, you know? My sinuses are draining. I don't remember. You said you don't remember. Don't remember what? My lawn. I don't remember. We'll come back to that, Kathie. Now let's move back to you lying there and feeling comfortable, and the probing, or whatever it was, has stopped. What happens after it stops? I'm asleep, and I feel nice and warm, and like a warm rush through me from my chest to my arms and legs, and I feel fine, and I'm just asleep. Do you feel Tommy there? No, I feel that pinching on my face again, between my eyes. I don't feel the pain. I just feel the pressure. Something's poking me. I'm on my stomach and something's on my neck. It feels like a collar on my neck. But I'm still in bed asleep. It will go away. What's happening, Kathie? I'm having that dream. I must be having that dream about the guys in my room because I'm seeing them again. I just must be having that dream. Is it in the attic bedroom? I'm not in my attic room. I'm in bed asleep, and I see this guy. I see what he looks like. He looks like the same guy I had in my other dream. That's all. This guy smiles at me. He smiles a lot. Not so bad. Is he there in your bedroom with you? I don't know. He's in my head, I guess. Or I guess he's in my dream. I don't know where he is. I guess I'm just in bed. In your dream about him, do you see anything around him? Where is he? Just all blank. All blank. White. Whatever. He's smiling. When I first saw him, I was scared. But he's smiling, and I'm not scared anymore. Why should I be scared of a dream? I feel fine. I feel really relaxed and relieved. At this point, Kathie's memories of the examination and her encounter with the small man seem to come to an end. There is, however, one final surprise. That can't be right. I must be imagining that. What's that, Kathie? I couldn't be outside. I wouldn't even go by the windows when I called Sue. Where are you outside? In my backyard, I guess. Let's not try to make sense of this, because dreams are funny and don't make sense. Just tell me what you see. Are you alone outside? Yeah. Are you in your nightgown? Yes. As you look around, what do you see? Just my backyard. It's dark out. Are you standing outside, Kathie? Yes. I guess I'll go in. I don't know why I'm standing out there. I just go in through the back door and go to bed. How do you feel now? Fine. I'm gonna go to sleep. That part must have been a dream I was having or something. 'Cause I couldn't have been outside. I'm in bed. Are the TV and stereo on? No. Did you turn them off? I guess. Is Tommy still there? Yeah. Shortly after this, I brought Kathie out of the trance. Though there were a few minor differences between details she had previously remembered and those she recalled under hypnosis, the two accounts dovetailed almost perfectly. It was easy now to imagine the entire sequence of events. After she returned from the store the first time, she begins to feel cold and tingly. When she notices the clock, she becomes agitated, almost as if she knows she's late for an appointment, and immediately thereafter returns to the store. Somehow, she and her car end up not at the 7-Eleven, parking lot, but instead near a brightly lit object she sees as the store. The clerk, it is now obvious to her, is the small gray-skinned figure of previous recollections. And in fact, she told me later that she knew him and that he was familiar to her from her 1979 attic experience. Kathie returns home frightened, apparently unconsciously aware that there is more to come. Hoping to forestall the inevitable, she phones Sue in New York to no avail. Eventually, she settles down and the abduction begins. As she slips into a possibly prearranged quasi-trance, she is somehow transported out of the house and into the UFO. She is poked and probed and turned this way and that in a typical UFO abduction examination. Something like a collar is put on her neck, causing her a lingering discomfort and leaving tiny bloodstains on her pillow. At some point, she opens her eyes and sees the small gray figure once more, but this time against the blank whiteness that so often characterizes the interior of a UFO. He smiles at her with his eyes, as she later informed me. His tiny slit of a mouth never moves, and she falls back to relaxed sleep. She awakens, of course, stunned to find herself standing outside in the backyard in her nightgown. Apart from its unusual two-stage imposition, this abduction seemed typical of the many so-called bedroom visitation experiences familiar to UFO investigators. After these 2 hypnotic sessions in New York, I had no reason to suspect the profound significance of that October encounter. Yet, months later, Kathie was to spontaneously recall a previously unremembered event that occurred that night inside the UFO. Her later recollections of that occasion are perhaps the most important in the history of UFO research.